Welcome to the SEO Insider with your host, Seth Price, founder of Blue Shark, taking you inside the world of legal marketing and all things digital.
Welcome, everyone. We're so excited for Louis Scott here from the eight-figure firm. Welcome.
Hey, thanks for having me on. I'm looking forward to this talk.
Absolutely. There's a lot of people in the coaching space doing a lot of different very cool things, and I think you've sort of found a neat lane for yourself. And love to sort of just hear a little bit about how you're approaching, because there for a long time there were a lot of people helping people get to seven figures, and there were a lot of masterminds maybe for the elite firms, but very few people trying to get people through that seven-figure slog. And it seems like you've created a neat program there.
So yeah, I mean, one of the reasons we chose eight-figure firm is because prior to 2020, I had never heard of anybody even talk about it. I mean, you had the people who were seven figures, and then you had the people who were like behemoths, and I never heard anybody say anything about eight-figure firm. And I know it wasn't part of the conversation from a daily perspective, because when we went to GoDaddy.com to find the website, it was available. Eightfigurefirm.com was available. And then we applied for the trademark, and I got the trademark. So it's funny how now the eight-figure firm concept is kind of part of the conversation. And even though I own the trademark, I see all of my competitors use eight-figure firm, and I'm just like, it's all good. You know, they can keep saying my name if they want to. But the genesis of this was that less than 0.15% of businesses reach 10 million in predictable revenue. And so that's one out of 667 firms reach that. And I have a personal vision statement of leading a life of significance. And I asked myself the question, what would be more significant than helping people create a legacy? What would be more significant than helping people make an impact in their community where thousands and thousands of families are being affected in a positive way? And so we set out to do something that was unheard of. Seven figures was heard of. The behemoths were anomalies. We wanted to make it an everyday conversation. And 4 years later, it's become that.
It's funny because I started out with, a law firm, me and a buddy in the basement, just figuring out how to make a buck. Real estate was downturning. He wanted to practice law. I didn't. And a couple of years later, now between Blue Shark and Price Bennett, a couple of multi eight-figure businesses. And I look now and it's like there's so many cool, positive resources on scaling, but go back more than like 5, 6 years ago, there really weren't many options at all on the market.
Well, I think the options didn't exist because there wasn't a way for the people who knew how to build those businesses to actually sell those options or to provide the options. And I think social media, the shrinking of our world through the digital space has really made it virtually, easy. I hate to say that word, but it has made it easy to communicate with people. We have law firms that are out of country. We just had a law firm that hired a eight-figure firm from Australia. And I would have never been able to do that 5, 10 years ago. But now here we are, working with law firms around the world. And it's because of the accessibility of the digital space. And people have become more knowledgeable about in the legal firm, the legal space specifically, they've become more knowledgeable about how to build a business. Where back in the day, even 5 years ago, building a law firm was all about relationships and referrals. That's not the case anymore. And so people have become more savvy when it comes to building firms.
No, absolutely. I smile because I actually studied abroad in Australia and was a summer associate there. So my goal is to have enough Australian clients. I was there last summer for fun, but to be able to someday return there for business purposes and have a full write-off. That's goals in life. What are some of the things that you see? So you've been at this for a bit, and you've now made a decision to focus exclusively on this and not dabble, which is something I'm personally jealous of. Like there are days when like having the law firm test kitchen is awesome, but there's also the distraction that comes with that.
Sure.
So, you're all in on this, but when you look at the people that you've worked with, what do you think are some of the biggest obstacles that you see across the board that people are facing when they do have a firm that may be low seven figures trying to break through to the next level?
I haven't found a firm. We've worked with 150 firms in the last 3.5 years, and I have not found a single firm where the primary obstacle was not the owner. I just haven't found it. And, for any owner who's out there listening, if you're at, seven figures or you've been plateaued at 2 million, 3 million, 4 million, and you're looking for why, you're looking for the key employee, the key marketing, you're blaming competition. You just need to look inwardly, because a lot of times the owner is the biggest obstacle, and they're the obstacle in three primary ways. They don't change fast enough to adapt to the things that are happening in the market. They refuse to treat the employees the way that the employees demand in today's environment. And then the third thing that they do is they don't treat their law firm like a business. And any of those things can keep you from 8 figures. A combination of those things will virtually guarantee you don't get there.
Interesting. So, a lot to unpack there, but I live it on a daily basis, right? Things that I've embraced as somebody along the way, where I went from really no coaching to probably too much coaching, from, adding EOS in to create those meetings. And I don't care what it is, if you're using scaling up EOS, some private label one, whatever it is, any of these different tools, whether it's a coach from 8 figures, that make you sit down as a team on a regular basis and communicate, that's, businesses run like that. And law firms very often are people off in their own silos doing that. So totally appreciate that. And as something that, having attended one of your summits, that jumped out at me. And I think that this is getting a lot more attention, that how employees are, how you recruit, how you onboard, how you retain, and looking at things. Again, I'd argue for the first 10 years of our company or for our law firm, culture was just the force of wills of me and a very dynamic litigator, my law partner, Dave Benowitz,
Right.
that people wanted to follow into battle because he was a lawyer's lawyer. And
Right.
that it's one thing when you have a dozen people in your shop. We're a force of personality. I mean, you walking in a room commands a certain amount, but when you start having managers and then mid-level managers, you may not know the names of everybody within an organization at some point. And that unless there is some sort of greater mantra that pushes down, that touches people positively, it's hard to keep people happy and rowing in the same direction.
I mean, I agree. I've always said charisma is not enough. Charisma is not enough to sustain a business. Charisma works at the beginning. Making decisions based on gut works in the beginning. After that, you have to turn from the hustler into the CEO, and the CEO is a much more measured person who knows how to command, not from the authoritarian's perspective, but knows how to get people to move in the direction that they want them to move. And that's something that I really, really was good at. I could get anyone to do anything I wanted them to do because I was skillful at identifying their why, the logical or emotional reason that would push them to do what I needed them to do. And so I think that's the differentiator. When you talk about you have multiple 8-figure businesses, you're in the 4%. Both of your businesses are in the 4% in the country. It's because you've learned a certain skill set, and that's what building a business is all about. It's a certain skill set where you treat people a certain way, where you act a certain way, where you run the company a certain way. And everybody can work hard, but it's working hard with the right skill set that actually gets you the result.
I mean, some of it also, and I think that it was interesting because, the law firm that you helped scale, is a big physical facility in a market that COVID didn't hit as hard as the Northeast, where people disappeared. And at best, you're on a 3-day a week, in office. And at worst, people are highly virtual. And I feel that some of this also resonates, that when you are under one roof, there are certain advantages you may have where a dynamic leader can walk through and touch people and check in with people not all being in the same office, now being countrywide and in some cases internationally. It takes much more thoughtful or purposeful actions in order to keep that stickiness rather than just the job. I mean, I think one of the things you've sort of looked that I think you focus on well is how do you change this from a job you show up for a paycheck, which is a dime a dozen, to something where somebody is a raving fan and wants to be there and build and grow that operation.
Yeah, one of the things that I tell my law firms, and I have several virtual law firms. I have a couple of law firms who are 6, 7, $8 million who are virtual. I have a couple that are 10 million who are virtual. And the thing that I tell them is you have to be more intentional than an in-person, firm to develop that culture, to develop that connection, and to develop the engagement, because it's not a naturally occurring thing. You don't naturally engage with people when you're working in a virtual setting. So you have to create that. You have to manufacture that in a different way. And so that's one of the reasons why virtual firms tend to have revenue per employees that are way down. When I compare, and I have a
Really?
graph that I can show, in-person firms have a much higher revenue per employee than virtual firms. Not anecdotally, I'm talking about over 100 law firms that we've
That's
worked with.
amazing.
It's been the case, and the reason is because you can't extract as much productivity from somebody who is not accountable the entire day. And I'll tell you, even from my own experience, I work from home every once in a while, and I promise you, when I have an hour break, I'm watching Netflix. I go for a run. I actually went for a run today. I had a 90-minute break. I went for a run. I'm not working. I'm doing something else, and I own the business. So imagine if I own the business and have all the incentive in the world to put in more work, take some breaks. The employees are doing the exact same thing.
Wow. So I was a tale of two cities. I mean, our law firm is back and mostly in person, but it is a hybrid compared to most. But Blue Shark itself, it went dark the day of COVID in March of
2020.
2020. And literally, this was a bunch of Gen Zers who didn't show up back to the office, period. We ended up going fully virtual overnight and ended up closing the office by the end of the year and just throwing the keys back to the landlord. It was the end of the lease. And I remember seeing like sandwiches and half-drank coffees from the day everybody ran out. And it was that extreme. I know in Atlanta you can't think like that, but it's one of the interesting things that I think that people that build firms virtually, and essentially this was a turnaround, but once it's in place virtually, there are certain advantages. And while yes, there is a certain amount of stolen time or that longer breaks than you might have otherwise, I also feel that like there are certain things that make it stickier. You eliminate commutes, which is essentially an immediate raise. You have people that you can get from parts of the country where costs may be lower when you're in major metropolitan cities. And that as that starts to expand, it means you need to be very conscious of the fact that people can get distracted. I live in DC, so there are a ton of government workers who never were virtual. Overnight, they're all virtual. And like they're out mowing their lawns in the middle of the afternoon for an hour and a half. I mean,
Right.
there is stuff. But what I saw, and this was immediate upon COVID, was the A players became A plus at home because they weren't distracted. And yes, the B minus players became C and C minus players. But theoretically, the goal would be that if you have a larger pool to hire from, you can upgrade. Whereas when we were constrained by people that would show up to our box, our hiring, we were much more limited. And I felt like we had a higher propensity of non-A players, and that now we have the ability to raise that level. So while there may be some Netflix or running, I'd rather have A players with a little bit of downtime where somebody's using that as regenerating time, but it's curious to hear more about what you've seen, that profitability per employee, that's alarming because I had not seen that, but it's not crazy. It makes sense.
Well, the thing is that you may still be profitable and not recognize that you could be more profitable. And I always use the health example, the gym example. There's three options. You can go to the gym and work with the trainer. You can go to the gym and work by yourself. You can work with the trainer virtually, or you can just work out on your own. And you know for a fact which one of those are going to be more engaged. If you work at the gym with the trainer, best result. If you work at the gym with no trainer, probably second result. If you work out with a trainer at home virtually, less result. And if you work out by yourself with no trainer at home you're not going to get any result. That's the reason why the entire treadmill market is full of thousands of homes that own treadmills where nobody uses them at all, right? And so, because once you put it in your house, that's where treadmills go to die. And
right, but there's also I would argue that if you had a virtual trainer, that you're showing up, it may be not quite as good as an in-person, but I would argue in some senses you might make more because the one you go to the gym for, you get yourself out of bed, you're not feeling great. Whereas if at home, you'd have a lot less of an excuse not to do it. Are there places where if you get the right people, again, this is what, I assume you're pushing towards, and I think you've been, if you recruit for what you need, can you find people that will actually thrive? Because there are people that use Tonal or Peloton and they're not going to a gym and they're getting on every day and they got their streaks. Can you hire properly for that hybrid environment?
Here's what I always tell people. I don't make consulting decisions based on anomalies. And I believe that people who can work out on their own at home with a virtual trainer are anomalies. If you look at the bodybuilding industry, which is the peak, if you look at any professional athlete or any professional industry at the peak, none of them use virtual trainers. They all use in-person people. You use an in-person piano teacher. You use an in-person voice coach. You use an in-person acting coach. You use an in-person, right? So like if you look at people at the peak, they always use people that are in person because you can extract more out of people that way. The fact that there are some people, or a very small pool of people, that can actually perform at peak without that, it actually just means that they're anomalies, not that they can be found in the marketplace. But I do want to address something that you mentioned, because I think this is a very big, I guess, pushback when I say that virtual workers are harder to find, the ones that can perform at peak. They always say, well, I have the whole country to look at. The problem is that the pool doesn't actually expand. What happens is that you now have to compete against other people who are also looking for the A players in other states. And so if the pool of people who, out of 100 employees, only 10 can work on their own at home virtually, you haven't had an expanded pool. You still only have 10% of all the country, and everyone's looking for those people. And so they're very, very coveted. And that's the problem with finding this. Again, I don't know of a firm that has a pool of all A players that work virtually. Like if I found that firm, I might change my opinion about this. But virtual firms experience the exact same problem that in-person firms do. Some are lazy, some are mediocre, some are excellent. And so the question is, if the lazy ones are lazier at home and the mediocre ones are more mediocre at home, and the A players are less A players at home, then you're still not extracting. But here's a good guide for the people listening. You should try to extract $250,000 in revenue per employee. And so you'd be the gauge. If you have a virtual firm, if you're listening and you have a virtual firm and you have 10 employees, you should be a $2.5 million firm. And if you're not, then you have an inefficient firm. If you have 20 people, you should be a $5 million firm. Now, the Small Business Administration says that what's an acceptable range is 200 to 250. So if you want to justify and go more conservative, you could say 200,000. But in-person firms, I have multiple in-person firms that are in excess of 300,000. Many of them, excess of 300,000 per revenue per employee. And I just don't find that in the virtual firm space.
Interesting. I guess I come from you dance from where you are. Look, Atlanta, very competitive market. In DC, I always found it very, very hard. And I'll give you examples of things. I could never land recruiters in DC who are going to come to my office and do their job at a level that I wanted, at anything near a price that I would want. And so to me, I'm using this as an example, because both Blue Shark and Price Benowitz both have excellent recruiters who are great for culture, have raised the number of butts and seats that we've gotten with them, that I'm convinced I couldn't get if I had looked for somebody. Because in DC, there's the alphabet soup of nonprofits, NGOs, government, for-profit, big law, and that the ability to get a butt in seat within my city, I found very, very hard, but was able to get greater talent. So can I tell you how many hours they're working? Can I tell you, is it possible that they're Netflixing and running for an hour and a half? It's very possible. But if the end result is consistent, because part of the other question is consistency. One of the battles I'm sure all your clients have is turnover. And can you get somebody who stays over time? Now, in one sense, in office gives you some stickiness, this camaraderie. But the piece that I saw, and this was most prevalent with Blue Shark, which is a slightly different model than a law firm. But what I found when I talked about when we went hybrid, where you only come in for days that you need to have a meeting, and if you don't, you can use the office. But like the people that were there all the time were our worst employees. They were looking for the coffee walk. They were looking for the extended lunch. They wanted that interaction. And that one of the things I saw was a dramatic decrease in drama. The drama level went through, was almost non-existent. Not that there wasn't a little bit here and there, but so, to me, what I'm asking is, I get what you're saying, and I get what you're saying as a law firm in general. And I don't, I get it. I saw what, you helped build in Atlanta. It was, it was awe-inspiring, both the layout, the design, how people were in their pods. And you somehow, in a very competitive market, found people. But are there, as you start to dig deeper, are there any positions that are more suited for remote where you don't want them to have interaction
100%.
as much and you
Yeah,
need them to stay in their lane?
yeah, absolutely. And that's a good question. There are some jobs that are absolutely okay, and that has to do more with personality makeup. When I coach people, I tell them that you have to make decisions based on the personalities of the people. People in IT, they can absolutely work by themselves. People in accounting, they can work by themselves. I mean, the personalities of these people, they don't care about being around people. And frankly, probably about 50% of the lawyers can probably work by themselves. When I tell people that they need to have some sort of in-person, it's usually for the general population of employees,
Okay.
the majority of the employees. So yeah, if you wanted to set up a law firm where the attorneys were virtual, your IT was virtual, your social media marketing team was virtual, and things like that, you could actually survive in those. What I counsel against, again, even though I have a virtual firm with over 100 employees, and they're doing phenomenal. Their revenue per employee is low though. That's what I'm arguing against. It's not, are they profitable? It's not whether they're
But
doing
hold on,
well
are you blending US and international on that?
in terms of revenue per employee.
Yeah.
I mean, so I do a discount with the international, but it's still an employee. Yes, you get them at a
Well,
lower
right, but
cost.
that I think that's not. I mean, look, I do it myself. Both Blue Shark and Price Benowitz each have 35 Latin American. I hate the word VAs, but international team members. We're actually trying to put in, paid holidays. That was our issue du jour. We had not had paid holidays. We just paid a high rate per hour, and people were like, "Yeah, they're resenting the fact that when we're closed, they don't get paid." So I'm like, "Okay, fine, put that in." I digress. But I think that if you're looking at it, that's another question because obviously the international is going to be virtual no matter what.
Mhm.
I guess you could have a base in El Salvador where everybody goes and you sort of would have an office there. But to me, when you're sort of talking about, because I look at you have my mind going off on revenue per person. And as you do that, like it's not a free lunch. You can't pay somebody $6 an hour and expect that person necessarily to generate the same revenue as somebody who's $80,000 and highly educated in the States. It's like there's likely a discount on that. Have you, when you're doing this, so obviously you have an entire virtual team, what are the things you think that you've been able to put in place that give you as much value as you can, or what are you doing to increase that? Are there things that, yes, they're virtual, but what can you do? What can a law firm owner do to try to get it better towards the equivalency of in office?
Yeah, I think you have to have more connection points. And so one of the things we do is we have a mandatory team meeting for 2 hours every single week where we come and discuss and share, and it's not just business. So I think that's one of the things. But also, we have actually paid for our virtual team to come from out of country and join us at our mastermind. So we were hosting these conferences and events, and we would fly them in, and they would be able to participate in that. And so finding moments where you can connect. One of several of the firms that I have, they fly their people in as well, and then they also go. Like one of them has 30 employees in one of these the Mexican border town. I can't remember the Veracruz. And she has like 35 employees in Veracruz. And in Veracruz, she goes there and actually meets all 35 of those employees and spends a week with them. And so it's a little bit more
No, I
involvement
hear
to
you.
fly
We're
there.
we're we're
But yeah,
experimenting for our all hands meeting for the firm. We only got a few of them, but a lot of visa issues first time doing it. But we had a handful of people join. And my theory is we have a lot of people in Nicaragua. Whether I go there, White doesn't like that so much. We may just go to the border town in Costa Rica, having like an offsite there, so we can at least spend some quality time face
yeah,
to
that's a
face.
great idea. I think that's a great idea.
So okay, we talked a lot about sort of maximizing that either virtual hybrid or in-person experience. You talked at the beginning about lawyers and law firm owners getting out of their own way. What are the things that you think somebody can do short term? Like I am now blessed to have a C team that I can delegate to, and when I'm disciplined and everything goes through those people, life works better.
Yeah.
I'm not necessarily, I think I'm still young and fun. I still think I'm your age, but like when I walk into a room, they see me as their dad. And like I
Right.
don't even say anything. They start to like quiver. That's why I carry my dog everywhere. So that like at least there's somebody that they could relate to. But what are the things that you think that lawyers should be doing to be less damaging to their potential growth?
I think the what I find a lot is oversight on things that don't matter. Like for instance, a lot of lawyers, they want to have oversight over the blog on their website. Like, come on, man. Like, who cares? That blog is for marketing purposes. Nobody's reading that blog. And if they do and there's a mistake, just let it be. Like, just move on. And I think that there's a lot of oversight for things that don't matter. And it creates kind of like a a feeling of being micromanaged. And I think that that's one of the things that they can do is just ask yourself what really matters and only oversee those things and let everything else go.
You know, it's funny. Andrew Finkelstein, one of my mentors, genius in this space, says, you know, if you want to scale, you have to get comfortable with mediocrity. And it sucks because you're a hard driving guy. You want things done great. But I feel like if you want to be a guy sitting and coaching 3 clients, it's one thing. But the moment you want to be able to touch more people, it's really important that you're like realize that it won't be perfectly clean. My law partner, if I let him read every page of content on the web, I'd have like a 3-page website and we'd have no lawyers.
Right.
And I'm just like, dude, you want to make money? And again, there's some cringe moments that have gone on. We've posted some
Sure.
stuff over time that's not perfect, but it's what is going to get you there. Um, as far as, do you think that there are lawyers that you're dealing with? I mean, you have a pretty good swath of those lawyers. How many of them should be looking at these? How do I put this? How many of them in a perfect world of resources were unlimited, or should they have somebody not themselves managing people where they got through law school, they have a JD, they figured enough gumption to get this to 7 figures, but that the management gene, the management, piece is really not their piece. How many people that you're seeing, if you could wave a magic wand, would you put a head of ops in there and block them from doing anything that all of their vision would go through that person?
Okay, so like talking to you and just meeting you and knowing you, you are not the normal law firm owner. Okay, you are much more personable. You seem to be much more like kind of in tune with what's going on in the world. I would say 99% of the law firm owners are not you, right? They are very hard to deal with. They're hard drivers. They're inconsistent in the way that they manage and the way they lead. They're not good at implementation. And so what the majority of my law firm owners, the sooner they can get a second in command, the better.
Right. And that to me was, was the sort of game changer. And what, many people, this is sort of the dirty secret, right?
Mhm.
When you start out, you can't necessarily afford the true COO.
Right.
And that I think is a pull and tug where when you have an office manager, you should be allowing that to happen. And this is something I personally struggle with. I see a lot of people struggle with, which is if you allow that person, assuming that they have the goods, to be the person who delegates down, it also protects you a bit. All those things that you sort of positively attributed to me, if feedback I've gotten over time, because what may seem like rational and on focus and on point to an employee may not seem that way when things happen. And so
Yes.
that is there a piece where if you can be that rock star that comes in, says hello, glad hands, and allows the friction and discipline to be pushed down, is that something to be striving for? Or do you think that that's something that the law firm owner at the end of the day, buck stops with them, they need to push on that?
I mean, look, the thing is that the phrase "the buck stops with me" is a cliche to some extent because many law firm owners still look for the scapegoat. They never fire themselves; they always fire the team member. So if it stops with them, why aren't they firing themselves from the job? And here's the thing: I mean, you've never seen Jerry Jones fire himself from being the Dallas Cowboys owner.
No,
I hope that doesn't hit some people too hard, but like you've never,
I'm a
there's never
Giants
been a
fan, so I got nothing.
you get yeah, but like there's Cowboys fans out there. Nobody's ever said get rid of Jerry Jones. He clearly doesn't know how to win a championship. He's been
Right.
the owner for 25 years, 30 years. All right. So the buck doesn't stop with him because if it did, he'd fire himself for not being able to win a championship. And so that's a cliche. What I will tell you is what happens with a lot of owners is they want the $250,000 COO, but they can't afford it. And so they view every person through the lens of what the $250,000 COO is. And I always say, look, you got to show some grace. If you hired an $80,000 an operations manager, they're not going to be as good as a $125,000 director of operations. They're not going to be as good as a VP of operations at 165, and they're not going to be as good as a COO at 225, 250. So you gotta be willing to accept that you hired someone who doesn't have the skill set, education, maturity, time in the industry, and be willing to use that person still as a conduit as you grow your business.
I smile because I literally just had this conversation. I mean, I'm 20 years into this and I'm just making these breakthroughs, like and it's easier to see in somebody else. And somebody at our firm not relying upon an asset that we have who is very good, but is not at that highest of levels. And you're like, hey, if we did that, you would get paid X amount less. So I need you to sort of work with it until the time where that person is at that level.
Absolutely. And I think that we don't show enough grace to our employees. We expect them to be, you hire a marketing coordinator at 55,000 and you expect them to run your entire marketing organization, from top to bottom. It's like
guilty as charged. I am the cobbler's shoes. Right now at my firm, we have a ton of great stuff going on, but we are literally, because Blue Shark does our digital, that's been the one piece. And I literally, what you're saying there is not just like, being spoke from the podium at some conference. Like I've lived it. I've had more people disappoint me at $50,000 where intuitively I should know what I'm getting. And so with that, how do people get involved with 8-Figure?
So they can reach out to me on my personal website. It's luisscottjr.com, LUISSCOTTJR.com. They can find me on social media, my books. They can find 8-Figure Firm there. And just send me a message. Also, I do speaking engagements, so send me a message, and I'm happy to help.
Well, thank you so much. This has been great, and hopefully catch up again soon.
Thanks.
Thank you for tuning in to the SEO Insider with Seth Price. Be sure to check back next week for fresh insights into building your brand's online presence. Episodes are available to stream directly on Blue Shark Digital's website.